The city of LA blames landlords for homelessness and for the lack of affordable housing and wants to ban landlords for screening tenants for credit score, eviction history, the inability to pay rent during the pandemic, and for applications for rental assistance. Landlords blame lawmakers for the tougher tenant screenings. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of Los Angeles, California. Now, as you know, Los Angeles has some of the strictest anti-landlord laws in the entire country, and it is probably very, very difficult to be a landlord there, especially if you're trying to follow the rules and do everything according to the law. Now, what happened during the pandemic was they put in place all of these eviction protections, eviction moratoriums, etc. And a lot of landlords didn't get paid for a very long period of time. On top of that, there is rent control within the city of Los Angeles. So landlords, they're trying to navigate this system where there's all these rules, all these regulations, all these tenant protections, and still make money. What is the only course of action that you're going to take as a landlord if they tell you, hey, if your tenant doesn't pay rent, you can't evict them? Well, you're going to try your best to make sure that tenant can pay the rent, okay? And you're going to do that by having extremely strict screening criteria. You're going to be like, hey, you've got to make 3 or 4 times the monthly rent in your income, okay? You've got to have a high credit score. You can't have any blemishes on your credit history whatsoever. All your finances have to be correct. We're going to have, a good security deposit down. Your previous rental history is going to have to be great. You can't have any evictions on your record whatsoever. That's what I would do. I mean, that's what I do now, and I'm not even dealing in a place like California, okay? But if a landlord doesn't have the ability to look at those things, then there's a possibility they could put someone in their unit who won't pay them, and they could be out thousands. In fact, in a place like LA, more like hundreds of thousands of dollars, okay? I mean, really, you could suffer immensely by not being able to screen your tenants correctly. But the city council up in LA, that's exactly what they want to do. They want to take away the landlord's ability to look at the financial history and the credit history of the tenant that they're going to be putting in their investment, and that is wrong, okay? I've mentioned this before. Whenever I read about a story about a location, a locality that wants to do this sort of thing, then I have to bring it up because, this is absolutely ridiculous. You're taking away one of the strongest tools we have to ensure that our investment is well taken care of. That's what this is really about. When you're talking about a house in Los Angeles, it can be $1 million home. Imagine you're putting a tenant in $1 million house, and this tenant is unable to pay the bills and is going to tear your place apart. I mean, that would be horrible. Okay, and no one would be surprised one bit if you went there and you got somebody and they've been evicted 3 or 4 times and they have a horrible credit score. They never pay their bills. Would you be surprised if this person suddenly stopped paying? I wouldn't. Anyone with common sense would say, hey, that person probably isn't going to pay you, But according to the city council and, the city of Los Angeles, well, it's wrong. You're causing homelessness. Well, if the solution to homelessness is that somebody has to live in my house or my unit for free, and I have to pay to keep them off the street, well, I don't want to be the solution to homelessness then. They need to pay their bills, they need to pay them on time, and they need to be good tenants. And that's all I ask, okay? I'm not running a charity here. I'm not running, I'm not the homeless shelter. I'm not the affordable housing provider. So yeah, this kind of situation is very, very frustrating. Now, before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button if you haven't already. Maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think, okay? What do you think of Los Angeles basically banning landlord from being able to check out the credit score, the eviction history, the, if the person was unable to pay rent during the pandemic, if the person, has any application out there for rental assistance? In general, right, I'm not against the rental assistance program, like if they applied for it. Now, if they apply for it promptly, okay? if they applied for it immediately, like, they paid last month's rent, and then the next month they know they're not going to be able to pay, and then they applied for it. Well, that's not a deal breaker, not in my opinion, right? My problem is when the person, they sat in the unit for a full year, not paying rent, not applying for rental assistance, and then right when they are finally about to get removed from that unit, guess what? Now we're going to put in an application. That's my problem, okay? Anyway, let's get into this article and see what it says. And this article is coming from laist.com, and it says, as landlords intensify tenant background checks, some lawmakers want new limits on screening. Yeah, of course they do, okay? Most of these lawmakers in a place like Los Angeles are going to be extremely anti-landlord to the far left, okay? And they think landlords are evil. They're pushing for the most socialist system they can possibly push for. Essentially, they want, the government to take care of everything for everyone and everybody to be essentially in poverty together. That's what they're pushing for, in my opinion. But hey, let's get into this article and see what it says. In response to California's broad protections for those unable to pay rent during the pandemic, landlords have intensified their screening of new tenants. It's now common for LA landlords to demand that applicants show months of pay stubs verifying high incomes, proof of timely rent payments during the pandemic, and excellent credit scores. After 2 years of state and local eviction protections, landlords say they're fearful of taking in non-paying tenants. But their increasingly strict screening has left many renters all but shut out of LA's housing market. The intense scrutiny has even prompted some LA lawmakers to propose new limits on screening practices. City Councilman Mike Bonin said these mounting barriers are hurting the city's ability to reduce homelessness. Unless we start chipping away at the various different systemic roadblocks to people getting off the street, we're never going to get through this crisis, Bonin said. Yeah, the very person who probably was pushing the policies and rules and regulations that created this problem now is trying to create another rule, policy, or regulation to try to solve the problem. So you created the problem with all your ridiculous rules, and now you're trying to solve it with more regulations. See, the solution isn't more government regulation. That's what these people need to understand. More government regulation makes things worse, not better, okay? I'm not even a small government guy. I'm not one of these, people who believes that government should be absolutely tiny or, pretty much non-existent, or that everything should be privatized, right? However, I do know that too much government regulation, it makes things so difficult. It bogs things down. It makes things more expensive. And that is the reason why there's so many problems in places like Los Angeles and in California, okay? Only those with stellar credit need apply. A recent listing for a 2-bedroom apartment in Glendale started by highlighting the unit's perks: stainless steel appliances, gated parking, and proximity to the Americana at Brand Mall. Then, in all capital letters, the ad listed the requirements for new tenants. All applicants had to show monthly income of at least 3 times the $2,195 rent. They had to prove they reliably paid rent at their previous address, and they needed an excellent credit score, 750 or higher. Sandra Chandler, the landlord who posted the listing, said she disqualified any applicant who didn't meet these criteria. I couldn't take them, she said, because I couldn't take a chance. Chandler said before the pandemic, she never asked for proof of past rent payments, and back then she was willing to consider tenants with lower credit scores. But she hasn't had a non-paying tenant yet, but she said state and local renter protection laws have forced her to be more selective. Yeah, smart lady, okay? She is covering her own butt. She has to, okay? She has to. That's what landlords, that's what we have to do. We are looking out for our own best interests first. In a place like Los Angeles, this is especially important because if she puts the wrong tenant in there and this tenant doesn't pay the rent, guess what? She will go through hell trying to remove that tenant. She might even have to pay the tenant to leave. That is how crazy it is. So, when you have a person who has an excellent credit score, they don't want to lose that excellent credit status. So most of the time, they're going to pay their bills on time. They're going to, not take on financial burdens that they can't afford. And they're going to be a better overall tenant. Now, the part about having the 3 times the monthly rent, I do that as well. Okay, I don't look as much at credit score as she does, but I do look at their monthly income, and I also contact the previous landlords to make sure that they were good to their previous landlords as well. So that's common throughout the country, not just in California. But that credit score thing, I mean, it's completely understandable. Now, I could understand if you were in a situation where you didn't have a huge number of renters, you might have to look at lower credit scores. But guess what? There is a housing shortage in most places, especially in Los Angeles. So I'm sure she is inundated with a huge number of excellent tenants that she could put into her property. So she probably has no problem getting somebody with a 750 credit score to come in and rent this place, especially considering the rent is like almost $2,200 a month. So this person has to have a pretty decent job, So, you're going to have a lot of people with decent jobs and good credit scores applying, and she's going to have the pick of the litter, essentially, whoever she deems to be the best tenant for her place. Okay. And can you blame her? I mean, think about it. Can you really blame her or any other landlord for doing things this way? Why would you want to take in a tenant who has a lower credit score, who doesn't make 3 times the rent, who possibly could become unable to pay the rent, and then you're unable to get rid of them? My requirements have gone up because I've been put in that position by the government, Chandler said. The government doesn't care if I can pay my mortgage. They don't care if I can eat. They don't care if I can pay for my bills. I have to protect myself. Wow. Couldn't have said that better myself, okay? I'm glad that this article, at least they actually interviewed a real landlord and they found out what a real landlord thinks. But let me skip down a little bit in this because I'm more curious about this law and what it says. And they have like one of those tenant hard luck stories in here. Don't care to read it. I'm sure we've all heard enough of the tenant hard luck stories, and we're more interested in what is going to happen for the landlords in Los Angeles. So it says here, city council members want credit scores off the table. Arguing that the city has a duty to promote fair access to housing, 3 city council members have put forward a motion seeking to ban landlords from screening tenants based on credit scores, eviction records, applications for rent relief, and failure to pay rent during the pandemic. The proposal would also prohibit the use of algorithmic screening tools. Housing advocates say these automated background checks are riddled with errors and promote racial discrimination. Research from the Urban Institute shows that median credit scores are significantly lower in LA communities of color than in the region's majority white communities. Well, listen, okay? The credit scores are not lower because of race. Okay, they are lower because the people in those communities have a worse credit history. Okay, they don't base the credit scores on race. If they knew anything about how credit scores were figured out, they would know this. And this proposal, it's absolutely ridiculous, okay? And I hope that it doesn't pass. But knowing that this place is coming out of, this bill is coming out of California in a place like Los Angeles, right? It probably will pass. But once again, I'm going to tell you exactly what I would do if I was a landlord there. I would sell, if I have a single family home, I would sell my property to an owner occupant and not be an investor there anymore. If you own a multifamily building, convert the place over to condos or sell it to someone else who is willing to deal with all of the ridiculous laws and rules and regulations and invest somewhere else. Okay, there's so many places throughout the country where you still have your property rights, where landlords are still treated with respect, and you don't have to put up with this garbage.